The room didn't erupt when she left. It exhaled, like something invisible had just been pulled out of its foundation. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just the quiet hum of screens. And then, one by one, they began to flicker. The conference room was too polished for what had just happened. Glass walls, chrome edges, a long table reflecting the cold geometry of ceiling lights. It all looked composed, untouched. As if words like, "you're useless," didn't still linger in the air like a stain no one dared to acknowledge. She didn't argue. That was the first thing that unsettled them. No defensive tone, no sharp inhale, no attempt to reclaim dignity in front of 12 silent managers pretending to check their notes. She simply stood there for a fraction longer than expected, long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable, and then reached for her badge. A soft click. It echoed more than it should have. She placed it on the table with surgical precision, aligning it parallel to the edge, as if even in this moment she respected structure more than the system respected her. Then she nodded once, not to the CEO, but to the room itself, and walked out. No one stopped her. That was the second mistake. Behind her, the glass door whispered shut, sealing the moment like a document filed too quickly. The CEO adjusted his cuff, exhaled through his nose, and glanced around the room with the faintest hint of satisfaction, like a man who believed he had just corrected an inefficiency. "Let's proceed," he said. And they did. Or at least, they tried. At first, it was subtle. A delay in loading dashboards, a flicker in the CRM interface, a spinning icon that lingered half a second longer than usual. The kind of thing you ignore, because systems always have quirks. Because admitting something's wrong would mean admitting timing. And timing in business is never coincidence. "Strange," one of the analysts muttered under his breath, refreshing the page. Another clicked twice. Then again. Nothing. The CEO continued speaking, outlining Q4 projections with that same clipped confidence. Numbers, targets, forecasts. His voice steady, authoritative. But the room wasn't listening anymore. Not fully. Something had shifted. Laptops began to glow brighter as people leaned closer. Tabs reopened. Passwords re-entered. Someone checked the Wi-Fi connection, though it was clearly intact. A quiet ripple of uncertainty passed through the room, too subtle to name but impossible to ignore. Then came the first real break. A notification sound. Sharp, out of place. Error. Authorization failed. One screen, then another, and another. Now the silence was different. It wasn't controlled anymore. It was fragile. "Is anyone else having issues accessing active deals?" someone asked, trying to sound casual and failing. A pause. Then 3 voices at once. "Yes. Same here. It's not loading." The CEO stopped mid-sentence. For the first time, his expression flickered, not with panic, but with irritation, as if the system itself had chosen an inconvenient moment to misbehave. "It will handle it," he said quickly, brushing it aside. "Let's stay focused." But focus had already left the room, because somewhere, deep beneath layers of dashboards and automation, something critical had just gone. Silent. And no one had yet said her name. But they were starting to think it. Because 10 minutes ago, everything worked. And now, it didn't. And the difference between those 2 moments? Walked out without raising her voice. Someone reached for their phone. Someone else stood up. The first real crack had appeared, but they still didn't understand where it led. And by the time they would, it would already be too late. The illusion of control didn't shatter. It unraveled. Slowly at first. Quietly. Like a thread being pulled from a perfectly tailored suit, one no one realized was holding the entire structure together. "Refresh again," the CEO said, sharper now. They did. Nothing changed. The CRM didn't crash dramatically. No alarms, no red screens. Just absence. Deals that had existed minutes ago now returned empty fields. Client histories, gone. Contract stages, reset. Pipelines flattened into blank, indifferent grids. A system still running, but no longer recognizing reality. "That's not possible," the sales director whispered, scrolling faster, as if speed alone could force the data back into place. Across the table, someone opened a backup dashboard. It mirrored the same emptiness. That's when the room shifted from confusion to calculation. "Check permissions," one manager said quickly. "Already did," came the reply. "Access levels are intact." "Then why can't we see anything?" No one answered, because the question wasn't technical anymore. It was structural. The CEO stood up, not abruptly, controlled, deliberate, but the movement carried a weight that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. "Call it." "They're already pinged." "How long?" 2 minutes ago. 2 minutes. In a company that measured performance in milliseconds, 2 minutes stretched into something uncomfortable. Something exposed. A notification popped up on the main screen. Not an error. A delay. "Sync pending. External authorization required." The words hung there like a locked door with no visible handle. "External?" someone echoed. The CFO, who had been silent until now, leaned forward slightly. Not rushed. Not surprised. Just attentive, in a way that suggested he was finally looking at the right layer of the problem. "Who holds final authorization on deal validation protocols?" he asked, almost casually. No one responded immediately, because everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to be the one to say it first. The sales director cleared his throat. "Technically, it's distributed across departments." "Technically," the CFO repeated, eyes still on the screen. "And contractually?" A pause. A longer one. Then a quieter voice from the far end of the table. "It's centralized." The CEO turned his head. "Explain." The CFO didn't look at him. He was already scrolling through something on his tablet, movements precise, almost methodical, like someone confirming what they already suspected. "SLA Section 12, he said. Just that. No emphasis. No dramatics. But the effect was immediate, because Section 12 wasn't operational. It was foundational. A clause most people skimmed, filed away, forgotten under layers of execution and urgency. The kind of clause that only matters when everything else stops working. The CFO tapped once, then again, pulled up the document. "There's a signature requirement embedded in the deal finalization layer," he continued. "A validation key. Without it, the system doesn't complete the transaction cycle." Silence. Not confusion this time. Recognition. "But we've been closing deals all week," the CEO said, slower now. "Yes." The CFO nodded. "Because the key was active." Was. The word landed heavier than it sounded. Someone exhaled. Someone else leaned back, as if distance from the table could somehow reduce proximity to the realization forming in the room. "Where is the key stored?" the CEO asked. The CFO finally looked up. Not at the screen. Not at the room. At him. "It's not where," he said quietly. "It's who." Another pause. This one longer, because now there was no avoiding it. No reframing, no delegation. The system hadn't failed. It had recognized a condition and responded exactly as it was designed to. "Her signature," the CFO said, almost gently, "is the final authorization layer in SLA Section 12. No one moved, because suddenly the timeline rewrote itself in their heads. 10 minutes ago? Everything worked. 9 minutes ago. She walked out. 8 minutes ago. The first delay. Now, nothing closes, nothing syncs, nothing exists in a state the company can act on. The CEO's jaw tightened. "Revoke it," he said. We can't. Override it. There is no override. The CFO didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This clause was designed for compliance integrity. It prevents unauthorized deal execution. It's irreversible without the original signatory. Silence returned. But this time, it wasn't fragile. It was final. Somewhere in the building, phones were starting to ring. Clients waiting for confirmations. Deals expected to close. Revenue timelines measured to the minute. All of it. Suspended. By a single absence. The CEO looked at the badge still lying on the table. Perfectly aligned. Untouched. And for the first time since she left, it didn't look like something she had given back. It looked like something they had just lost. And the worst part? They were only now beginning to understand what it would cost to get it back. If this moment made you feel that shift, that quiet reversal where power changes hands without a single raised voice, then stay with this story, because what happens next isn't louder. It's sharper, and far more expensive. Follow, like, and don't miss the next chapter, because the price of one decision is about to be calculated in real time. No one said her name out loud, but it moved through the room anyway. Unspoken, precise, unavoidable. Like a variable in an equation that suddenly explained everything. The CEO didn't sit back down. He remained standing at the head of the table, fingers resting lightly against the polished surface, as if grounding himself in something tangible while the intangible slipped away. His reflection in the glass wall looked almost identical. Same posture, same control, but the version in the room had already begun to fracture. "Caller," he said. Simple, direct, operational. The sales director reached for his phone immediately, grateful for something actionable. A task, a direction, anything that resembled normalcy. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. No one reacted outwardly, but the shift was measurable. Shoulders tightened. Eyes avoided one another. The air thickened, not with panic, but with calculation recalibrating itself under pressure. Again, the CEO said. This time it went straight to voicemail. A micropause. Then the CFO spoke. Not loudly, but with the kind of precision that cuts through noise without effort. Before we continue attempting contact, we need to quantify exposure. He turned his tablet toward the screen, mirroring a set of numbers that didn't look alarming at first glance. Pipelines, pending deals, forecasted revenue, all standard, until he filtered by status. Anything in pending validation is now suspended, he said. A single tap. The number recalculated. The room didn't react immediately. It took a second. Just one, for the magnitude to register. Then someone exhaled sharply. That's today's closes, the sales director said. Not just today. The CFO corrected. Rolling 48-hour cycle. Another tap. The number expanded. Now it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was visible. And these? Someone asked, pointing at a different column. Delayed, the CFO replied. But delay in this context means renegotiation risk. The CEO's gaze hardened. How much? The CFO didn't answer right away. He adjusted the filter again, narrowed it, then widened it. When he finally spoke, his voice didn't change, but the room did. Enough to move quarterly projections. Silence. That was the third mistake. Because numbers don't create panic. Timing does. And somewhere outside that room, clients were already noticing. Emails not confirmed. Contracts not progressing. Automated messages failing to trigger. Small anomalies. Individually harmless. Collectively, a signal. Legal, the CEO said. A different kind of response now. Less operational. More strategic. If this is tied to SLA Section 12, we need options. The CFO nodded once. They're already reviewing. Of course they were. Because somewhere between minute 3 and minute 7, someone had already escalated this beyond IT, beyond operations, into the layer where contracts become leverage. A notification appeared on the central screen, not from CRM, from internal comms. Legal. Review in progress. Clause Section 12. Activation confirmed. No one spoke, because the wording mattered. Activation, not failure, not breach. Activation implied intent. Design. Structure working exactly as written. The CEO's jaw shifted slightly. Find a workaround, he said. The CFO didn't move. There isn't one. Then build one. That would require rewriting the validation architecture. The CFO replied evenly. Which would require time. How much time? A pause. Not for effect, for accuracy. Best case? Several hours. Hours, in a system calibrated to seconds. The word didn't land as sound. It landed as consequence. Someone's phone buzzed. They glanced at it, hesitated, then spoke. Client asking why the contract hasn't finalized. Another vibration. Same here. A third. They're noticing. Of course they were, because systems don't fail in isolation. They ripple. The CEO turned, slowly this time, and looked at the badge still resting on the table. It hadn't moved. Of course it hadn't. But now it carried weight it didn't have before. Not as an object, as a symbol. Control, relinquished in form, but not in function. Get her back, he said. Not loudly, not forcefully, but with something new beneath the words. Not authority. Urgency. The sales director hesitated. How? No one answered immediately, because this wasn't a meeting anymore. It was a negotiation that hadn't officially begun. And the other party? Had already left the room, without raising her voice, without asking for anything, without even turning back, which meant one thing. When she did respond, it wouldn't be reactive. It would be intentional. And intentions, when backed by contracts like SLA Section 12, don't come cheap. Somewhere in the system, another deal froze mid-process. Another client paused. Another metric slipped by a fraction no dashboard could yet quantify. But they would. Soon. And when they did, the number wouldn't be the problem. The terms would. Because the company hadn't just lost access. It had lost position. And position, once surrendered, is never reclaimed at the same price. The first reply didn't come through email. It came through silence. Measured, deliberate, structured in a way that felt almost contractual. Because by now, everyone in the room understood something fundamental. She wasn't unavailable. She was choosing not to respond. And that distinction shifted everything. Legal update, the CFO said, breaking the stillness with surgical timing. All eyes moved, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. They've confirmed the clause is fully enforceable, he continued. No ambiguity, no override pathways. The authorization key tied to SLA Section 12 is singular. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. The CEO exhaled slowly, then straightened, as if recalibrating posture could restore leverage. What are our exposure mitigation options? The phrasing was precise. Not solution. Mitigation. Because somewhere between the first failed refresh and this moment, the problem had already evolved into something else. The CFO tapped his screen again. Another set of numbers appeared, more granular this time. Short term, he said. We can pause outbound deal execution, communicate technical delays, and attempt to stabilize client expectations. Attempt, the CEO repeated. A microhook hung in the air, because attempt implied uncertainty, and uncertainty in this room was a currency no one wanted to spend. And long term? The CEO pressed. The CFO paused, not for drama, for accuracy. Re-engagement with the original signatory. The words landed cleanly, clinically irrefutable. The CEO's gaze shifted once again to the badge, still aligned, still untouched. But now it looked less like an object and more like a reminder of sequence, of cause, of consequence. Then we re-engage, he said. Simple, logical, late. On what terms? The CFO asked. A small question, a large implication, because this wasn't a recall. It was a negotiation. And negotiations begin with position, which at this moment, they didn't have. The CEO didn't answer immediately. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked not at the room, not at the screen, but at the timeline forming in his head. 10 minutes. That's all it had taken. 10 minutes to convert a personnel decision into a structural dependency. 10 minutes to reveal that what he had dismissed as replaceable had never been positioned that way in the first place. Prepare an offer, he said finally. The CFO didn't move. Define parameters, he replied. Another micro pause, because now every word mattered. Scope, authority, control. Compensation adjustment, the CEO began. Retention guarantee. Expanded oversight. Each phrase sounded like control, but each one in reality was concession. The CFO nodded slowly, inputting nothing yet. Addendum to SLA Section 12, he said. The CEO's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of addendum? Clarifying authorization redundancy, the CFO replied. If she agrees. If she agrees. Another shift. Subtle, but decisive. Because now the system wasn't waiting on IT or legal or internal escalation. It was waiting on her decision. A notification blinked on the screen. Not from CRM, not from legal, from an external email gateway. The room stilled. The sales director stepped closer, as if proximity could accelerate processing. The message loaded. Short, structured, no greeting, no signature flourish, just text. Received missed calls, unavailable for immediate discussion. All matters regarding SLA Section 12 to be routed through counsel. No emotion, no explanation, no urgency, just boundaries. The CFO read it once. Then again. Then, almost imperceptibly, nodded. Predictable, he said quietly. The CEO didn't respond, because this wasn't defiance. It was positioning. Clean, professional, irreversible. She's escalated, someone whispered. No one corrected them, because escalation wasn't loud. It was precise. The CEO's hand moved, slowly, toward the badge. He didn't pick it up. He just looked at it more closely now, as if searching for something he hadn't noticed before. But there was nothing new there. No hidden message, no signal. Just a simple piece of plastic. Returned, not surrendered. Route through counsel, he repeated. The words sounded different this time. Less like instruction, more like acknowledgement. Because the negotiation had officially moved beyond this room, beyond this table, into a space where tone doesn't matter, where hierarchy dissolves, where only one thing defines outcome: structure. And she had already built it. Somewhere another client email came in, another deal paused, another fraction of trust, recalibrated. The CFO closed the tablet. Time is now a variable we don't control, he said. No one disagreed, because they all felt it. That subtle shift where urgency stops being internal and becomes external pressure, measured, accumulating, unforgiving. And the longer it built, the higher the price of resolution, because this was no longer about restoring access. It was about negotiating terms of return, and those terms were no longer theirs to define. By the time legal joined the room, the tone had already changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in the way conversations shortened, in the way people stopped speculating and started waiting, in the way the screens, once tools, now felt like silent witnesses to something unfolding beyond their reach. The counsel didn't sit immediately. He placed his folder on the table, aligned it, almost mirroring the badge, and opened it with the kind of care reserved for documents that don't allow interpretation, only consequence. "We've reviewed the structure of SLA Section 12, he began. No preamble, no soft entry, just facts. The authorization mechanism is not a procedural layer. It's a contractual control point, embedded, binding, and under current conditions, exclusively linked to a single signatory." No one interrupted, because everyone already knew who that was. But hearing it phrased like this, stripped of names, reduced to structure, made it harder to argue with. "Can it be bypassed?" the CEO asked. The question was expected. The answer was not delayed. No. Not unlikely. Not difficult. No. The counsel continued, voice even, measured. "Any attempt to circumvent the clause would constitute a direct breach of contract, immediate legal exposure, potential invalidation of affected deals, and, depending on client response, reputational escalation." The words didn't rise, but their weight did. "Define escalation," the CEO said. The counsel closed the folder, not abruptly, decisively. "Loss of trust and execution integrity," he replied. "Clients question whether finalized deals are actually enforceable." A pause, then quieter. "And whether future ones should be." That was the line. Not revenue, not delay, trust. Because revenue can be recalculated, time can be negotiated, but trust, once questioned, doesn't return at the same valuation. Silence settled again. Not fragile, not uncertain. Resolved. The CEO leaned back slightly, finally sitting down after standing through most of the collapse. The movement was subtle, but it carried meaning. Position had shifted. "Options," he said. The counsel didn't open the folder again. He didn't need to. "There is only one viable path," he replied. Re-engagement, not rehiring, not reinstatement. Re-engagement. A term that implied distance, independence, a new structure, not a return to the old one. "And if she declines?" someone asked. The counsel didn't answer immediately, because this was no longer about probability. It was about consequence. "Then the company operates without full deal authorization capability," he said, "indefinitely, until the clause is renegotiated, which would require her participation." There it was again. Not optional, not replaceable, participatory. The CEO's fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. "How do we approach?" he asked. The counsel looked directly at him now. "Not as an employer," he said, "as a counterparty." The distinction was precise and final, because employers give instructions, counterparties negotiate, and negotiation begins with recognition of leverage, which, in this moment, was not in the room. A quiet vibration passed through several phones at once. No one checked immediately. They didn't need to. They already knew what it meant. Time wasn't paused. The outside world was still moving. Deals still expected to close. Clients still expecting responses. And every minute that passed without resolution repriced the situation. Upward. "Draft terms," the CEO said. But his voice had changed. Not weaker, sharper, more careful. Because now every word carried cost. The counsel nodded. "We'll propose engagement through legal representation," he said. "Independent contractor status. Revised compensation structure. Authority defined explicitly, not assumed." "And SLA Section 12? The CFO asked. The counsel allowed himself the smallest pause. "As is," he said, "unless she offers amendments." Unless she offers. Another inversion. Because now the clause wasn't a constraint. It was an asset. Her asset. The CEO's gaze returned, one last time, to the badge. Still there. still perfectly aligned, but now it didn't represent access, or identity, or even departure. It represented a moment, a decision made in seconds, that would now take days to unwind and cost far more than anyone in this room had anticipated. Send it, the CEO said. The council closed the folder. Draft first, he corrected. Because even now, precision mattered, especially now. The screens around the room remained active, systems running, data present, infrastructure intact. And yet, nothing moved forward. Because forward in this system required a single condition, a signature. Not physical, not visible, but embedded deep enough that its absence rewrote the behavior of everything above it. And somewhere outside this building, she already knew that, which meant the next move wasn't about fixing what broke. It was about defining what it would take to make it work again. And in negotiations like this, the one who doesn't rush sets the price.